Part 2 of the Klance story, part 2, day 1, part 1. This is part 2. I promised that I would upload it eventually, and now I have. So, yeah. I've already recorded this once, but then my story decided to say haha fuck you, and I've had to delete quite a bit. But it should be smooth sailing now. So far last time it took about 19 minutes and I got to 3/4 of the way through. So, as I said last time, even though you didn't hear it because it got deleted, if this ends up going over 40 minutes, like my last one, I'll probably end it there and do part 3 to this as well, instead of day 1, part 3. But I doubt I should. Anyway, let's get... Oh yeah, before. I'll probably mispronounce half the words, or names and pronunciations. I'm British. I can't pronounce things. I'm not the best. So yeah, let's get on with this. Day 1, 3:18 p.m. Something strange nudged itself against Keith's neck, a tongue tracing against his hairline. A sensation of warm breath put his hairs on end. In the state of sleep, Keith moved into the touch. A low groan slipped from Keith's throat, and the tongue continued to slip against the goosebumps on his neck. What a wonderful dream this was. Lance, he mumbled into the pillows, his eyes still closed from sleep. A small puddle of saliva stained the fabric beneath his open mouth, and in his dreaming state, Keith continued to murmur incoherent words. The feeling of rough scales scraped Keith's neck, and suddenly his eyes shot open. My family have just come back home. Let's see if I can get this before they decide to come upstairs. The feeling of rough scales scraped Keith's neck, and suddenly his eyes shot open. If he hadn't been awake before, he definitely was awake now. And in bed with him, curling next to his back, a long reptilian tongue hanging from its mouth, was a 3-foot-long iguana. Keith screeched so loud that the iguana launched itself from the bed, only to scurry across the hardwood floor and slip into the arms of little Matteo. Flung into a sitting position, Keith had sweat on his forehead and ragged breathing whistling through his teeth. What? He wheezed through breaths, his pupils dilated and his heart pounding. Was that? Matteo's high-pitched small voice answered him. That was Greedo. Greedo? Keith questioned the boy. Then lizard's name. He gulped down some air and attempted to calm his rapid pulse. Is Greedo? It's an iguana, Matteo announced, while stroking the iguana's head. I brought him in here to say hello, but you were asleep. Matteo was crawling onto the bed with the iguana now. He tugged at the strange blanket Keith was wrapped in. Since he didn't recognize Keith. Since when had Keith been in a blanket? He didn't remember. He didn't recognize the soft fabric, or even remember falling asleep with it. As Matteo squirmed to get beneath the comforter, Greedo escaped from the child's grasp. Keith shrieked and scrambled to the corner of the bed, attempting to get as far away from the iguana as possible. Why is he so big? Keith yelped frantically, pushing his body up against the interjoining walls. He was cornered, and the iguana didn't seem to be moving anywhere, just flicking its ugly reptilian eyes. God, why did the Sanchez family have so many animals? Lance claimed that they didn't live on a farm, but this felt like a bloody zoo. Chickens, a goat, a dog, and now an iguana. What's next? Tigers? Mateo squealed. He likes you. Keith stuttered and turned his eyes to Mateo with a plea for help. Get him away from me. Mateo reached for the iguana and pulled him into his lap, treating him like a creature. He treated the creature like a stuffed animal, but with more care and compassion. He stroked the reptile's head and held him close to his chest, as if the iguana was a small kitten, except Greedo had scales, not fur, and was probably more than half the size of Mateo himself. It's all right, Greedo, Mateo whispered to the iguana, patting his head thoughtfully. Keith is just scared because he doesn't know you very well. Don't be sad. You're very unique. That's what my mommy tells me. He sounded out the syllables of unique as if he was trying to learn the word correctly. Keith will think so too after he gets to know you. Mateo was such a puzzle. The boy was so kind and warm-hearted, yet the way he spoke to the iguana made Keith wonder if the 5-year-old had heard the exact same words, but from his own parents. Keith sighed and crawled off the bed, peering at the full-length mirror hanging from the wall on his right. Keith noticed his hair was a wild mess of bedhead. He cursed under his breath, hoping Mateo didn't hear him, and began running his hand through his hair to fix it. You sleep talk, Mateo declared nonchalantly. That caught Keith's attention. What? You sleep talk, Mateo repeated, and this time the two were making eye contact. Keith didn't like looking in people's eyes, especially with a 5-year-old whose eyeballs practically bore holes into his skull. Keith frowned. No, I don't. Mateo giggled. Yes, you do. You like to say Uncle Lance's name. You say it lots. You go, Lance, Lance, Lance. That sent shivers up Keith's spine. All right, so maybe he had dreamt about Lance, but that was obviously just a random dream. It didn't really mean anything. He had dreams about guys all the time. It wasn't like he actually wanted to make out with Lance. That was a stupid idea. Except, no matter the excuses, Keith no matter the excuses Keith forced into his head, he still felt anxiety creep and crawl and muddle his insides. Do you dream about him? Mateo wondered aloud. Do you love him? Keith had no idea what he was doing or what the hell he was even saying, but he found himself doing it anyway. Mateo, Keith whispered, suddenly leaning down next to the bed so that the two were eye level. He was fully ignoring the iguana now, not caring when it crawled past him and out the door. Can you keep my sleep talking a secret? The 5-year-old nodded his head instantly, eyes round in anticipation. It's a big secret, and you're the only one who gets to know. Keith was holding Mateo's hands, clasping the small palms in his own. Mateo was taking this very seriously. His little eyebrows furrowed and his bottom lip slightly puckered. Yes, I can keep your secret. I'm good at secret keeping. Keith nodded. We're partners now. Partners in crime. Wow, Mateo whispered, even quieter, squeezing Keith's hand. I think we're good partners in crime. And then something strange happened. Keith smiled. It wasn't that Keith didn't smile. He did, at least every now and then. But this grin, this one was feeling very different. This was caused by an odd feeling that felt foreign to Keith, a sense of protectiveness. Normally, Keith despised kids, but Mateo, he suddenly had the urge to hold him and never let him go. Why? Because they're partners in crime. Day 1, 3:49 p.m. After chasing down Greedo and banishing him to his cage, both Mateo and Keith decided it was time Keith go back to the family. Falling asleep not even an hour after arriving wasn't the best first impression, and Keith regretted ever letting his head touch the pillow in the first place. Keith realised later on that the Sanchez family didn't care about first impressions, at least not in the way Keith thought they would. "I'm sorry I didn't make you a welcome home dinner," Rosa rambled on as she raced across the kitchen to grab her car keys. They hung from the family key hook next to the fridge, a large Yoda keychain dangling from the ring. Benji came sprinting past the kitchen with a guitar case in hand, Josie fumbling behind while still attempting to tie her shoelace. Mama, we gotta go." Benji raised his eyebrows impatiently and pointed towards the front door. "It starts in 10 minutes. Again, I'm sorry," Rosa repeated, all while ignoring her impatient son. "Danny and Rachel will be here, but I think Rachel took Mateo out to buy Christmas gifts. Don't worry about it, Mama. It's just," Rosa continued, never stopping or halting for breath. "Benji has guitar practice at 4, and Josie has Girl Scouts, and Cleo..." "Ma." Lance calmed her, holding her shoulders and kissing her hairline. "It's okay. Keith and I can eat frozen pizza." The woman sighed, accepting defeat. She stood in Lance's arms for a moment, still and clutching at her son's arms. "Are you sure?" Lance nodded. "You gotta buy me donuts while you're out there." Lance nodded. "You gotta buy me donuts while you're out there." Benji groaned, practically swinging his guitar case around in annoyance. "Mama, I'm going to be late." Rosa scowled before shouting behind her, "Just get in the car, Benjamin. I'll be right there." Lance chuckled. He gave his mother another hug, her head just barely scraping the bottom of Lance's chin. Keith felt absurd. He was a stranger, imposing on an exchange between mother and son. It was so foreign to Keith, he couldn't remember a single time being held like that. Anyways, Rosa continued, moving away from her son, grabbing her purse from the kitchen counter. "I will make you a welcome home meal, whether you like it or not." "Anything I want?" Rosa nodded. "Anything you want." With that, she was gone. Josie scrambled to catch up in her Girl Scout vest. Once Rosa left with the children, Keith and Lance were left to their own devices. The only other individuals in the house were Greedo, Danny, who just happened to be passed out on the couch with a 2-year-old girl on his chest, and Terminator, the dog. Keith had never been a huge fan of dogs. If anything, Keith was a cat person. They were cuddly and soft, and they rubbed their fur against your legs and purred. Dogs are terrible. They slobbered and smelled, and they jumped on you at the most inconvenient of times. Terminator was all of those things, and more. Keith was amazed at how much Lance loved the creature, or even how Lance could tolerate kissing that slobber-covered mouth. Keith leaned against the counter and took a bite out of the apple, watching as Lance popped a frozen pizza in the oven. Isn't your mom, I don't know, worried we'll have sex in the house with the house empty?" Lance's fist squirmed in disgust. He slammed the oven door closed. Ew. No. Keith swallowed down another bite. "Really? think about it. We're two college students supposedly dating, and she just left us home alone. We're not home alone. There's Danny and Isabella. Lance pointed through the kitchen door and into the living room, motioning to a sleeping father and toddler. Keith gave Lance a blank stare. You and I both know you've had sex with people in the same building. I have not. A snort. Remember Rolo? Lance paled, the pink leaving his cheeks. He slowly shut the door to the oven, even though it's already closed, but sure. All the while looking blankly at anywhere other than Keith. That was a one-time thing. Hunk said he heard you 3 times. Lance cursed under his breath while viciously tossing the pizza box into the recycling. That traitor. Keith chuckled into his hand, having finished his apple, and tossed the core into the garbage and turned to face Lance. So what I'm saying is, if your mum asks, what should we tell her? My mum isn't going to ask if I have sex. That's weird. But if she asks, what then? Lance groaned, running a hand through his hair and striding through the kitchen into the basement. Well, if my mum asks about my sex life, I'll just have to lie. And say what? Lance never missed a beat, speaking as if the answer was completely acceptable. Say that we have sex. It was Keith's turn to go pale, and the bluntness of Lance's words making Keith stutter. Keith was fine with lying about having sex. This was a fake relationship. It required lying, so that was fine. What he wasn't fine about was that it was Lance. Lance made Keith angry. He pushed his buttons and plucked at his skin. He annoyed Keith to no end. It was a miracle they survived the trip a full day, let alone agree to it in the first place. Except, despite Lance's flaws and annoyances and the things that he did that made Keith want to scream, Lance was a funny guy, and the two actually got along when they weren't bickering, usually bonding over video games, movies, even the torment of their other friends. Sure, they bickered a lot, but after that, they could laugh. The two of them may not have been best buds, but they were definitely friends in a weird, twisted sort of way. So Keith muttered, changing the subjects drastically. What movie do you want to watch? Day 1, 5:57 p.m. I can't believe we're having this conversation. Keith whispered, fingers rubbing his temple. It's a fight. Our first fight as a couple. Lance sat on the floor of the basement, a circle of DVDs placed around his crossed knees. They were Star Wars movies, each placed in order from best to worst. The boys originally planned on finding a simple movie and popping it into the DVD player. Not this deep conversation that they already had several times over. Don't be dramatic, this isn't our first fight, Lance mumbled as he continued to shift his movie order, placing Revenge of the Sith right next to The Phantom Menace. I merely said that The Force Awakens was on the same level as A New Hope. That doesn't mean you have to get all theatrical on me. Keith groaned rather dramatically and stretched his body across the red couch. But it's not on the same level. Force Awakens was a cinematic masterpiece. It should be right next to The Empire Strikes Back. Lance paused, almost dropping the DVD in his hand. He cursed. In his hand. Bullshit, he cursed. a low voice. He cursed, voice low. Empire Strikes Back is the best. I will fight you on this. I never said it wasn't the best. It obviously is. But what I'm saying is that The Force Awakens is also good. Also super good. But it's not, Lance-wise. Finn was annoying. Keith gasped. Finn is my boyfriend. I thought I was your boyfriend. Again, making another noise of frustration, Keith sat up on the floor. Okay. Keith sat up straighter on the couch and then flopped his legs to the floor. Fake boyfriend. He paused, folding his arms over his chest. My point is, don't diss The Force Awakens. Lance began to name other things with his fingers. A glint in his eye that Keith could only recognise as malice. There was Finn who complained way too much. Rey was super hot, but she didn't ever use that staff of hers. What the fuck? And Poe was barely in the show and was obviously the best character. Alright, I'm done with this conversation. We're watching something else. Keith stood up and wrenched the DVD cupboard open, revealing colourful shelves lined with movies. He trailed along the spines and stopping when he found one that he thought was satisfactory. Without Lance's opinion to stop him, Keith immediately popped the DVD into its player by the wall. We're watching this one, he exclaimed, grabbing the remote control from the coffee table. What is it? If I tell you, you'll start complaining about something they did wrong. I just want to enjoy a movie. Keith plopped back onto the couch and grabbed a pillow, wrapping his arms around the cushion and burying his nose. As soon as the title screen came on, an excessive groan erupted from Lance's sides of the couch. Back to the Future? Are you kidding me? Nope. Keith bellowed, placing a finger over Lance's lips. No talking, we're going to enjoy this. As the movie begins, Keith noted how tired Lance was. The boy tried his hardest not to show it before. With meeting his family again and introducing them to his famous boyfriend. Now it was silent. The two of them wrapped in a blanket on the basement couch. It was serene. The lights had turned down low, and the two were finally able to relax. You can fall asleep, Keith whispered, 12 minutes in, watching Lance's heavy eyelids struggle to stay open. I'll tell you what happens. Lance's voice was barely intelligible, mixed with sleepy hums and the slow fall of his head. I've already seen it. Keith smiled. Instead of pulling Lance's blanket up higher over his chest. Sleep. Lance didn't need to be told again. He was out. Eyes tightly closed, mouth hanging open to release soft snores. It was cute, even if he was slobbering. Keith enjoyed the movie for a few more minutes before it happened. Lance's head falling against Keith's shoulder. He snuggled up against his right side, unconsciously burying his head into the crook of Keith's neck. He blushed, feeling embarrassed despite being the only other person in the room. He couldn't move either. Lance had attached himself on and refused to let go. What was he supposed to do? Push Lance away? That would wake him. And no matter how badly Keith wanted his arm back, the innocent look Lance wore was enough to stop him. Maybe Keith could just close his eyes too. The idea was intriguing. He'd been up driving all of the night prior. Keith finally gave in, letting his eyes drift closed, just as Lance had. He didn't even bother to turn off the movie. All he did was fall asleep, with his cheek pressed against the fuzz of Lance's hair. Alright, so that was part 1. Well, day 1, part 2. Well, technically it's a Klance story, part 2, day 1, part 2. There's a lot of syllables and it's... yeah. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Day 2 should be out later. And yeah, hope you enjoy. Bye guys.